They were one of the greatest singing groups of all time. Iconic in every way, the Jackson 5, later known as the Jacksons, would be a part of Motown Records' era of dominance during the late 60s and early 70s. Enticing audiences with smooth harmonies, succinct dance moves, and instantly singable songs. After enduring poverty, label moves, membership changes, and a brief career struggle, the Jacksons would be a family group that stood together in the good and bad times, and without a doubt would end the 70s as the most popular R&B group in the industry. Its entity would also lay claim to being the starting point for what many consider to be the greatest performer of all time, Michael Jackson. Their original run would span a glorious 2-decade period, and they were cemented in the eyes of the public before greed, jealousy, and distrust would implode the group and its public goodwill. As much as music would bring them together, it would also tear them apart, and the starting point for their personal descent would begin during the Victory Tour. Originally predicted to be the tour of the decade, and the first time that the public would be able to witness all 6 brothers on stage in years, it would eventually go down as one of the most disastrous tours in the history of music. This 5-month debacle would have such a negative impact on the Jackson family at large that we as a public wouldn't see the family perform together as a full unit for almost 2 decades after. This is the story of the Victory Tour and the breakup of the Jacksons.
It's my mama's garage.
It's 1983. 3 years have passed since the release of the Jacksons' highly acclaimed album Triumph. The group, formerly known as the Jackson 5, had successfully endeavored into transforming from a cute kids group with crossover marketability to a fully adult, critical, and commercial hit after they departed from their original label, Motown Records, in 1975. A move that resulted in original member Jermaine staying with Motown and the other members being forced to add their youngest brother Randy to the act. The rechristened Jacksons would go through quite a few growing pains away from the label that made them stars. But they eventually overcame it and arguably had an even bigger second career with their new label, Epic Records. As the Jacksons' artistic recognition soared, their former label Motown, while steady in sales and relevance, were far less crucial to mainstream American music, and largely relied on their flagship artists from 20 years prior like Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder. None of their newer artists could touch the kind of crossover appeal cultivated from their acts of the 60s and early 70s. And with that in mind, a concept was pitched by former Motown executive Suzanne DePass. The idea was to produce a reunion show highlighting Motown's biggest acts of the past and present. The end result would be the highly successful Motown 25, a one-time special that aired on May 16th of that year through NBC. The event would both reunite former acts back to the label like the Supremes, the Miracles, Mary Wells, and the Four Tops, but also give light to label mainstays like Marvin Gaye, The Temptations, Stevie Wonder, and Lionel Richie. With the opportunity to perform for thousands of paid concert goers and millions at home on a star-studded bill, you'd think that the Jacksons, one of Motown's final big acts during its glory years of prominence, would be a shoo-in to perform, right? Well, not so fast. The group was also asked to perform, and 5 of the 6 brothers did agree to the request: Jackie, Tito, Marlon, Randy, and Jermaine, who hadn't performed with his family since 1975. The biggest pushback would come from Michael, who at this point was only the biggest artist in the world through the release of his 6th studio album, Thriller. It was so successful that it would become the greatest selling album of all time and won a record 8 Grammys at the 1984 ceremony. Feeling that he was doing too many television performances and having a fear of overexposure, Michael declined the invitation. After turning down offers from both DePass and Berry Gordy, Michael finally agreed after conversing with Motown executive and close creative confidant Susie Ikeda. Contacting him through phone, she tell Michael, "Everybody's coming back to do this show. You've got to do this show," she said. "If the Jackson 5, one of the biggest acts in the company, don't come back to do it, it's not gonna be the same." Michael responded with a simple okay, but only under the condition that he'd receive his own solo set. All parties at Motown relented, and the six brothers would reunite on stage for the first time in 8 years, pulling off an excellent medley of their hits on the label. But what followed was not only the most memorable moment of the set, or even the most memorable moment of the night. It turned out to be one of the most iconic moments in the history of music. Donning an all-black outfit, white socks, and one glitter-lined glove, Michael Jackson would perform his hit song, Billie Jean, and it was here that he'd pull off the moonwalk for the first time. The single moment skyrocketed Michael into legendary territory, and his performance is tributed in pop culture to this very day. This performance is synonymous with everything iconic about the singer. His signature wardrobe, his signature song, and his signature dance move. With all of this newfound attention on the Jackson name, the group could only go up from here. On November 30th, the Jacksons would hold a press conference coordinated by boxing promoter Don King. King would announce that the group would be releasing an album and tour for the following year. All great on paper, but King's involvement was the first sign that the reunion may not be the best idea. Having less than a stellar reputation because of accusations that he cheated his clients out of millions, all of the brothers were reluctant to work with him. But it's what the brothers' parents, Catherine and Joseph, wanted, and he'd soon soothe their doubts when he delivered a $3 million advance to the group. Said conference was also awkward, with King spending a very large portion of it promoting himself. Michael, the only brother not impressed by King's overtures, pushed his brothers to find a new promoter, and the embarrassment of that press conference was enough for them to agree. But by then, it was too late. They had already signed on to work with King, and so it had to be. With the announcement, it was now time for the group to get to work on the album. Production on the group's 15th studio album would begin on November 11th of 1983. At the onset, things were not quite normal. Compared to their earlier projects being a collaborative effort amongst either the family or hired writers, the majority of the songs for this album were crafted individually by each member, and the brothers rarely worked together. It was seen by all parties as a money grab, apart from Michael, who was raking in millions at this point and only did the album and subsequent tour as a favor for his family. Each brother received a solo song as a result of the impersonal creation. But alas, the album would complete production on May 7th, 1984, and they'd settle on naming the album Victory, a testament to the Jacksons' near 2 decades in the music business. But the individualism of the album's creation carried over into its promotional rollout, as no promo photography was created, settling on an illustrated portrait of the 6 brothers instead. Victory would be released on July 2nd of that year and peaked at number 4 on the Billboard 200. Sales would be built off the Mick Jagger featured State of Shock, and the album would eventually become the Jacksons' most successful, selling 2 million copies. However, very little was put into promoting the record. Despite the huge numbers for State of Shock, a music video was never produced, and that song is largely credited by fans as a Michael Jackson record. The 2 music videos that were created for the album, Torture and Body, were both an odd affair. Neither feature Michael or Jermaine, and to compensate for their absence in the Torture video, a wax figure of Michael was placed alongside the other 4 brothers. And it's pretty obvious. Both videos were poorly received despite doing pretty well on the charts. Interest in the group was still at a high due to the nostalgia factor and Michael's popularity, so the idea of the Victory Tour was kept alive, gearing up to begin 4 days after the Victory album's release on July 6. The group would manage to negotiate a very lucrative deal with Chuck Sullivan, the son of the New England Patriots owner, Billy Sullivan. Sullivan's involvement in this story is incredibly long-winded and would require its own video to explain, but in short, the Jacksons brokered a contract with Sullivan that guaranteed they'd be paid millions for their tour, regardless of if each city sold out or not. Insane to any concert promoter at the time, but in Sullivan's eyes, it was an unlosable situation. He had the biggest star in the world on a US tour, and he predicted that he would clear at least $13 million for his troubles. So with a successful album, million-dollar backers, and fans clamoring to see the Jacksons' name one more time, things were looking real rosy, but those roses would come at a grave cost. Despite their cozy deal with Sullivan, the tour would still be very expensive to pull off. With that in mind, the Jacksons decided to negotiate with a corporate sponsor to alleviate spending. Quaker Oats was in talks with the group, and the deal was nearly signed, sealed, and delivered. But in the 11th hour, Don King would intervene and force the Jacksons to pull out, instead opting to have them do a deal with Pepsi. Even though the Pepsi contract would garner the group less money, they had no choice, as Don King had the authority to kill the tour on a whim. Regardless, the $5 million deal was unprecedented at the time, and so it was settled. A caveat of the deal required that the Jacksons produce 2 commercials for the company. Each one would use the tagline of Pepsi Generation and feature a redone version of Billie Jean with different lyrics. The first commercial went off without a hitch and is most remembered for the appearance of a young Alfonso Ribeiro dancing and mimicking Michael throughout. However, the second commercial would forever alter Michael's life and begin a domino effect that he never recovered from. On January 27th, 1984, the Jacksons would do The Shoot, a live performance in front of an audience of 3,000 at the Shrine Auditorium. The shoot was going smoothly and almost all of the commercial had been shot when the director, Brad Garaldi, requested that Michael come down the set stairs after the cued pyrotechnics behind him exploded. On the final take for that day, Michael followed those instructions, and the explosion went off like expected. Then suddenly things would go awry. One of the sparks from the pyro would land directly into Michael's hair, and as the singer went down the stairway, his hair was completely on fire. Michael's brothers and the video crew would quickly tackle him to put it out, and he'd be rushed to the hospital. The incident would give him 2nd and 3rd degree burns on his scalp and cause him grave pain that he'd deal with for the rest of his life. The condition would lead to Michael's painkiller addiction, the same addiction that he died from in 2009. Jackson would eventually settle with Pepsi for $1.5 million over the incident, and in the aftermath, the second commercial was completed from the footage shot that day. But this would only be the beginning of the turmoil created from the Victory Tour. What followed was a massive public relations disaster that put the group, and Michael in particular, in very negative light. The deal with Pepsi resulted in the promoters netting $5 million from the company, $3 million of which were devoted to the expenses of the tour. But more was needed, or rather, more was desired to further maximize profits. A plan was conducted by Don King, Chuck Sullivan, and the Jacksons' father Joseph to earn more. What would be known as the lottery ticket scandal would taint the tour in the eyes of many and leave a black eye on everybody involved with it. In short, fans that wanted to attend the concert would be required to buy 4 tickets, each at $30 a pop, through a newspaper mail order. Yes, required, no more or less. With the rise of artists selling tickets for hundreds of dollars in the modern day, that sounds like a steal, but in 1984, $30 was equivalent to $85 in today's money, and when you factor in that other acts like Prince and Bruce Springsteen sold their concert tickets at about $16, this outpriced several people. To make matters worse, The $120 money order did not guarantee a ticket. It instead guaranteed you be put into a lottery to potentially get a ticket. And the ticket winners were randomized via computer. All of the losers of the lottery would receive a refund 4 to 6 weeks after the event would take place. Sales would allow the promoters to have close to $1 billion in disposable income before refunds would be issued. And with that amount of money, they expected to pocket an additional $10 to $12 million in interest off the sham tickets. Yeah, very messy indeed. Yet, all of the brothers were on board with the plan except Michael, who advised that it would receive great backlash. But he was outvoted 5-1, so the lottery ticket system would be announced shortly before concert dates went on sale. The promoters articulated to the public that the plan was a way to discourage scalpers, but the public saw it for what it really was, a shameless attempt to rip off genuine fans wanting to see the spectacle. As predicted by Michael, the idea was panned by media and consumers. But worst of all, the scrutiny fell almost solely on Michael, as he was the most popular member that everybody wanted to see. To make matters worse, the lottery users would only learn that they won 2 days before their show in their state would take place. There were several instances where tickets would arrive after the concert, and fans would not be refunded under those circumstances. Most outraged were Michael's black, impoverished fans who were his biggest base, so much so that a young girl named LaDonna Jones would write him a letter criticizing him for the move. To soothe over public tension and kill the narrative that he was taking advantage of his fan base, Michael would donate his share of the tour to charity, set aside 2,000 free tickets to impoverished youth in every city, and create a better system for ticket distribution. But the price of the tickets would remain at $30.
I think that $30 was an appropriate price. You must understand, you get what you pay for. And there would be no apologies as far as the price is concerned.
All of this meant very little, however, as the damage had already been done. And from then on, Michael allowed the promoters and his family to do whatever they pleased in promoting the tour, telling his personal management that he didn't want to perform with the group after this tour. Michael would make his announcement regarding the ticket scam a day before the tour began, and despite the controversy, tickets still sold out in many markets. Fans were ready to see the brothers live, and expectations were at a high. So now it was time for the tour to begin. The Victory Tour would begin in Kansas City, Missouri for a 3-day engagement, selling out each day and totaling at 135,000 attendees. Fans and critics were highly complimentary of the experience, and the first couple dozen shows were regarded as something great to see. Like everything in this story, however, there were drawbacks to its production. The biggest being a leg injury that the oldest brother Jackie would sustain, forcing him to miss the first half of the tour run. Jackson would tell press that he hurt himself during rehearsals, but it's been alleged by several parties, most notably Jermaine's ex-wife Margaret Maldonado, that he actually received the injury from his then-wife after being caught in an affair with choreographer and singer Paula Abdul. Fans didn't really seem to mind though. Everybody was clearly there to see Michael, and the set list reflected that. Largely containing Michael's solo songs, this is widely considered to be the closest thing to a Thriller tour that audiences would get. But with the rigors of tour life and the long-lasting physical pain stemming from the Pepsi commercial, Michael's durability began to decline. There were several instances that the singer had to be hospitalized. The physical strife gradually progressed into the singer exhibiting some erratic behavior. It's important to remember that Michael was participating in a tour that he didn't want to be a part of in order to help his family. He endured an injury that left him with permanent physical and emotional scars, and he was the fall guy for a public relations stunt that he advocated against. Under those conditions, it's hard to fault Michael for the behavior that he displayed towards his family, but it also can't be denied that he became very unreasonable to work with. An instance of this was Michael threatening not to perform with his brothers until a publicist that he disliked was fired from the tour. Another was Michael's constant breaking of the agreed upon rule that only the brothers would travel together and not bring any outsiders to shows, often allowing Emmanuel Lewis and Julian Lennon, the son of John Lennon, to travel with the group and drawing the ire of the other brothers in the process. Over time, the separatism of the Victory album and the preparation for its tour would seep into the tour itself. The brothers would ride separately in vehicles. Jackie, Tito, Marlon and Randy in a van, Jermaine in a limo, and Michael also in a separate, even better limo. When they had to travel by air, the other Jacksons would fly commercial while Michael would fly in a private jet. Michael also stayed in separate, nicer hotels compared to his brothers. Perhaps the biggest form of tension would occur over Michael blowing up a huge movie deal for the group. Paramount Pictures would consult the Jacksons for a multi-million-dollar deal to film a tour stop, and then sell the performance to home video market after the tour was over. They would take a vote, and it would turn out to be 5-1, with Michael having the dissenting vote. Michael would threaten to leave the tour if the deal was struck, so with no real options, the group would turn down the deal with Paramount. And that was the end of it. Until 3 nights later, when Michael would bring his own film crew to produce his own video performance of the tour. The other members were so outraged by this that they blocked Michael from releasing the footage to the public. Tensions got so bad that the brothers wouldn't talk to each other outside of the stage show, and all business meetings were handled by their individual lawyers. It wouldn't be a reach to say that the concept once idealized as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity was now seen as a horrible headache for the promoters, performers, and paid concert goers. The Jacksons were no longer on speaking terms, and they were made to be laughingstocks to the public. To make matters worse, the novelty of the brothers' reunion faded, and shows were beginning to not sell out. Many shows had to be canceled, and several repeats in already sold-out venues were coordinated to make up the losses. But Don King was undeterred. He saw the bigger picture and knew that continuing the show outside of America was the only way to maximize its money-making potential. Prior to the final shows, King and Joe Jackson would begin plans to take the tour over to Europe and Australia. Michael, already having a dislike for King and bitter over the handling of the tour, quickly shut that down and informed the two that he would not take part in the tour with his brothers. In a memo, he wrote with minimal fluff, "I will absolutely not be going to Europe with the Victory Tour. Good luck to you, Michael." The final show for the Victory Tour would take place on December 9th, 1984, at LA Dodger Stadium. There, in front of a sold-out crowd and drenched in rain, Michael would announce,
"I'd like to say, this is our last and final tour, and I think this is our farewell tour. Y'all been wonderful, it's been a long 20 years, and we love you all." Woo!
The other Jacksons were stunned by the revelation, some even angered, but they held it together in front of the crowd. The show would end with positive reviews from critics and paid attendees. Backstage, things weren't nearly as congenial. Don King would say the following, "And yes, he really did say what I'm about to say." What Michael's got to realize is that he's a nigger. He's one of the megastars of the world, but he's still going to be a megastar. He must accept that. Not only must he understand that, he's got to accept it and demonstrate that he wants to be a nigger. Why? To show that a nigger can do it. Needless to say, Michael was very upset, and even considered suing King for his remarks. His handlers would talk him down from the idea, washing his hands with the entire ordeal. There was little to complain about at the end of the day. The Jacksons would net around $36 million for the tour, raking in around $7 million for each brother. As promised, Michael would donate all of his proceeds to charity. The tour was highly lucrative for all involved, with the exception of Chuck Sullivan, who would go into deep financial ruin after the conclusion of the tour. As stated before, Sullivan essentially paid the Jacksons regardless of whether or not the tour sold out. And when you add in all the highly expensive amenities both on and off the stage, he made less than $500,000 from the tour. With no other options, Sullivan put the New England Patriots up for sale in 1988. Though the money poured in for the family, it couldn't exceed the irreparable damage that the tour did to their symmetry. This would mark the official end of the Jacksons as the group as we knew, with Marlon leaving the group shortly after the tour's ending, and Michael going back to his highly successful solo career. The four remaining brothers would reunite one more time in 1989 to release the group's final album, 2500 Jackson Street. But it was a largely unsuccessful affair. They'd never create or tour as a 6-person unit again. And that was the Victory Tour and the breakup of the Jackson 5. After learning how much of a dumpster fire this was, it's hard to blame one single party. Was it Don King and Chuck Sullivan for their shoddy business practices? Was it the parents for advocating so hard to have King be a part of the tour to begin with? Was it the 5 less famous brothers for willingly going along with the promoters' terrible practices to acquire millions? Was it Michael's inability to stop the promoters from making so many shiesty choices? Apart from acknowledging it was a poor reflection on all parties, it's really tough to say. Family drama would follow the Jacksons largely up until Michael's passing, and the wholesome mystique that they established in the 70s and early 80s would largely disappear. Now they were seen as ungrateful and in possession of a limited moral compass. The trust of their loyal supporters was broken, but the silver lining to most broken things is that they can at least be fixed. As a testament to their willpower, all 6 brothers would reunite in 2001 for a 2-night engagement at Madison Square Garden, celebrating Michael's 30 years as a solo artist. This would mark the final time that the Jacksons would perform with all 6 of its members. Got any ideas that you want me to talk about on my show? Please leave them in the comments section. Please be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'm Calvin, and this has been my Mama's Garage. I'll see you next time.